Welcome to the Chessable Masters final. This is world number 1 versus world number 10. Magnus Carlsen versus Anish Giri. At the end of the video, we're going to look at the standings after day 1. Also, by the end, you will know the answers to these key points about the game. First up, they play 4 rapid games, that is 15 minutes on the clock, plus 10 seconds each. Now that ended 2-2. Then they play 2 blitz games. The first blitz game was a draw, but this is the second blitz game, and let's see what happened. Now in the blitz games, they both started with 5 minutes each, plus 3 seconds per move. Carlsen has white, Anish Giri has black. The game began. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4, the Nimzo-Indian defense. And here, Carlsen played a3, a surprise. This is the Saemisch variation of the Nimzo-Indian. Maybe Giri did not expect this. As you can see from this table, Carlsen has played the Saemisch 3 times last year. So he has played it in rapid games. Bishop takes c3 check, b takes c3 and c5. White's got double c-pawns, so you might attack them straight away. e3, knight c6, bishop d3 and now d6. Knight e2. This is the perfect setup, you could say, against the Saemisch, because white's got double pawns, so let's get after them. b6 instead of e5. Let's see this. Now what's the point of this? The bishop can go to a6, the knight can go to a5 first, then the queen can go to d7. And it's like we are having 3 pieces attacking the c4 pawn. For example, if this happened, then we have e4, knight a5, let's say, bishop e3, bishop a6, and we've got this kind of formation. Knight g3, queen d7. If this queen did not control this square, this queen can go to a4. Already we've got 2 pieces attacking the c4 pawn. So if white played queen e2 and then queen e4. However, in the game, knight e2 played and Giri went e5, all been seen before. Now on early e5, what's the disadvantage of this move? It gives the f5 square for white. After e5, maybe Giri was thinking white might make a decision in the center, because 2 of black's pawns are attacking the central pawn, so maybe expected Carlsen to either go forward or to take. But you don't need to make a decision. Carlsen went knight g3. And this knight on g3, Giri now wanted to attack it, so he played h5. Now what happens if you grab the pawn in the center? It looks like you bag a pawn, but that is not important here. It is worth it if white loses a central pawn. You take on d4, take, knight d4 and castle. And white has options. The bishop can go to b2. It can go to g5 to pin the knight to the queen. The rook can go to e1. So after knight g3, Giri wanted to chase the knight away with h5. But Carlsen enjoys his knight on g3, so he plays h4 to stop black playing h4. Queen e7. Not too sure about this move, because the queen is so useful on d8, because black can play knight a5, attacking the c4 pawn. Carlsen now plays d5, and here we see the vital difference. In the game, knight b8 was played. I will show you a better option soon. Knight a5 is not possible because queen a4 check, and we see it. If only there was a queen on d8, then it would be defending the knight. But here black is going to lose the knight. Whatever you do with this check, the knight will drop. So after d5, Giri realizes this and plays knight b8. He plans to reroute it. But another option, which may have been the best option, is to sacrifice a central pawn. It's a big decision by black. e4. Notice, queen and knight are protecting this pawn. So you've got two attacking it. Let's go back and knight e5. Black has got his knight to the center, but he loses the central pawn. But that's okay, because what happens now? Knight e4, take, bishop d7. And a position like this is playable for black. After bishop d7, you are stopping queen a4 check. So black is attacking a4, so white might go queen e2. And the game goes on. Is white a little bit better? Yes, he's got a pawn. But this bishop is not coming into the game anytime soon. Maybe black can castle queenside. Knight b8 played. e4. Giving white the option to play bishop g5. Very annoying. Giri is worried about another problem because the queen on d1 is attacking the h5 pawn along with this knight. So he decides to block this diagonal. f3, then the bishop goes back to c8. Bishop g5, pinning the knight to the queen. And it would have been really nice if the knight on b8 was on a5. But it's not. Queen gets out of the pin. Carlsen now takes, and this opening has gone horribly wrong for black. Castle. Black cannot castle on the king side, so he might shuffle over to the queen side. Knight d7, f4. The queen on d1 is attacking the pawn on h5. E takes f4. No need to take on f4 yet, let's grab the h5 pawn, more important. Now Giri makes a big decision. He plays knight e5, allowing knight takes f6 check, king d8 and rook f4. Now why did he do this? Because he was banking on knight g6. This knight attacks rook and pawn. This rook also attacks this, so it's this combination he was counting on. But he did not see Carlsen's follow-up. Just because you attack the rook doesn't mean you have to move it, and he plays a very nice exchange sacrifice queen f3, maintaining the pressure. He doesn't need to move the rook. Queen e7 played. What happens if knight takes h4? We're going to have a look at when black takes the rook, which he does in the game. So let's have a look at this. Knight takes h4 doesn't work because rook takes h4. Take queen g3. The queen can come in along the g file. Rook h8, queen g7. And the rook has no good squares. If you go rook h4, which is the only square, queen f8 is checkmate. All squares covered. The king cannot go forward because of the knight on f6. That's why here after queen g3, rook h8, queen g7, the best move is probably rook e8, but then you can grab it, and in a position like this, white is completely winning. This rook can join the party. This bishop can open up. You can time this, maybe even go bishop e2 to h5, putting pressure on f7. You're going to have three pieces. Queen, bishop, rook attacking f7. So after queen f3, queen e7 played by Giri, h5. Now he takes. And Giri wants to swap queens off. So he plays queen e5. Carlsen takes it, take, and g4. When is a knight better than a rook? When the rook has no open files to work with. This is knight over rook domination. a5, g5, rook a6, rook b1. Carlsen throws his advantage away. A better move is bishop e2. It doesn't let Giri play his next move. So if we look at rook b1, Giri's plan was rook takes f6. Maybe Carlsen missed this, because after gf6, rook h5, the pressure is now leaving the board. The point of bishop e2 was to protect your passed h-pawn. Rook b6, king f2. Rook b3, we can go d6. Black has got a pawn, but now rook g1. So the knight and bishop work better than the two rooks. Knight f6, bishop e2 work better than the rook on c3 and h8. After a move like g6, we're trying to promote, and white has a winning position. But Carlsen played rook b1, rook f6, g takes, rook h5, rook b5. This was Carlsen's point, attacking the a and the c pawn. It would have been nice if the black king was on c7, because then black can play b6, holding both his a and c pawns. But it isn't. Rook h3 played in the game. A better move would have been to identify white's most dangerous pawn, which is the one on f6, because it is the furthest advance. So Giri could have played rook h6, and after rook takes e5, we can go rook g6 check first, king f2, rook f6 check, king e3, and now b6. You might have been asking, why throw in a check? If you go rook f6 here, then you drop this pawn, and white will be winning. So this is a really cool variation, and maybe this is why Giri didn't go for it. Rook g6 check. And notice the king can go to the h file or the f file. But this is the idea. Amazing. If you go this way, rook h6 check first, forcing the king back to the g file, and then rook g6 check. And can you see the pattern? The king, if it wants to make progress in the game, it has to go to the f file. So dropping the f pawn with check. Wow. What a vital difference in this endgame. So white gets closer to the center to make progress. Rook f6 check, king e3, and now b6, holding the queen side. So maybe Giri missed this. Rook b5, rook h3. Giri goes for another pawn. Bishop e2, rook takes c3, rook takes a5, and rook e3 he blunders. Still, it's okay to admit your error. We can check and then go back. So a great move would have been rook g3 check, king f2, rook g6, rook takes c5, rook takes f6 check, king e3, rook a6, and black has enough counterplay. Black is attacking the a pawn, and he can get his pieces out. The bishop can go to d7. Black can play f6 to hold his center. Black is doing fine in this endgame, and it probably will lead to a draw. But after rook takes a5, rook e3 was Giri's blunder. He goes for the e4 pawn, which looks like a good pawn to grab because it is a central pawn, but white's furthest advanced pawn is the f6 pawn. And I think this is a key lesson. Giri should have gone after that one. Bishop h5, rook takes e4, and instead of bishop takes f7, Carlsen played rook a8, a brilliant move, pinning the bishop to the king, threatening bishop g4 in the future. So king c7, Giri gets out the way. If you go rook takes c4, then bishop takes f7, and now we have bishop e6, picking up the bishop. Rook f4, bishop e6, rook f6, we can take with check, king e7, and now rook c5, completely winning. This is even better than the game because white has two pawns. Rook a8, king c7, Giri gets out the way. d6 check, king d7, you cannot take because your bishop on c8 drops. King d7, bishop takes f7, rook g4 check, king h2, because we can't go to the f file because we're going to drop this guy with check. So we'll see what happens. It's very similar. King h2, rook f4, king g3 is exactly the same because the king goes to g3 anyway. Rook takes f6, and now we need to make this work, or else maybe everything just fizzles out. And Carlsen made it work today. He brought his bishop back to h5. The next move being bishop g4 check. There's no good way for Giri to stop this. So he goes rook f4. Notice the bishop on c8 cannot move, so bishop g4 check is going to win. Also, black has no good check. He can't check here because this bishop covers that square. So Giri plays rook f4, bishop g4 check, king takes d6, and bishop takes c8. Rook takes c4, bishop takes b7. Wow, this is so close because white only has a pawn. If this pawn leaves the board, it is very likely to be a draw. Rook and bishop against rook at the highest level is very likely to be a draw. Very close now. Rook c3 check, king g4 and c4. The a pawn is the correct pawn. The bishop supports the queening square. Bishop e4. Rook c1, rook a5. Rook f1. One trick with rook f4 check, winning the bishop. So king g3, rook f4, bishop f3. Staying close to the king and also forming a barrier. So then the king can also go to the queen side. Rook d4, king f2. Rook d3, bishop e4. Rook b3, king e2, so the king is marching over. King e3, rook b3 check, king d2, king c7, and a4. The pawn can be supported by the bishop. The game is over. King b6, rook takes e5, rook b4, and bishop back to c2, protecting the pawn. Giri resigned. Carlsen wins the second blitz game and he takes the first match. Why is black lost? Because there is no good way to defend the c-pawn. King c6, king c3, wherever you move the rook, king takes c4, and there is support. White can march the a-pawn, the bishop can go to e4, and you can see on e4 it controls a8, the queening square, making it a lot easier to queen the pawn. Let's have a look at the standings after day 1. Carlsen has taken the first match. Tomorrow will be the second match. Giri has to win that, or else the match will be over. If you think you've got a little bit better at chess, then subscribe to the channel. Here are the key points about the game. In the opening, maybe black should have gone for the setup, the best setup against the Saemisch. The knight c6 to a5, then you go b6, bishop a6, put the queen on d7. In the middle game, Carlsen played a wonderful exchange, sacrifice queen f3 to control the position. Knight over rook domination. In the endgame, black should go for white's most dangerous pawn, the one on f6, because if black's f7 pawn drops, Giri is in trouble. And notice before this happened, there was the great move by white, rook to a8, pinning the bishop to the king. Then white got the idea, bishop g4 in, winning the bishop. And then Carlsen won the endgame and the first match. Thank you so much for watching all the way until the end. If you think you've got a bit better at chess, then subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that bell. Then you'll get notified each time I release a new video. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you in a future video.